So, Nick, let's start there with a question from Gav Reed, who says, I've been loving the videos, boys. My one question is this: how much better do we actually think the offensive line will be with our free agency pickups? And two, how much faith do we have in Carmen Bricillo to improve Evan Neal and JMS specifically on the offensive line? Thanks, and I love you all. So thank you for that question.
Yeah. So how do we want to quantify better? Do we want to use some sort of scale on a scale from 1 to 10? How much better are they going to be?
I think that's fair. Maybe
With
a good way
last
to
year's
quantify
offensive
it.
line
Yeah.
being a 2, a 2.5. I think the Giants' offensive line, with the additions that they made, they have the ceiling of being an 8. That's their ceiling.
Oh.
Evan Neal develops. JMS hits a second-year stride. Andrew Thomas is healthy the entire season. Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon are above-average starters. Ceiling, 8. Reality suggests I think they're probably going to be around like a 5, like a league average type of offensive line. I think there's enough contingency plans in place that if Evan Neal sucks, they can kick Jermaine Illuminor out, who has worked with Carmen Bricillo in the past. To your second question, I don't really know how exactly to look at Carmen Bricillo and say, yeah, he's going to develop Evan Neal. It's blind faith at this point. There needed to be a change because Bobby Johnson was not getting through to him. So hopefully this guy from the Raiders, who had a solid offensive line with, I would say, adequate talent. There wasn't a ton of talent on the Raiders offensive line. So I would say it's just blind faith at this point, and I'm just hoping that Carmen Bricillo can, but there's really nothing for me to add that suggests, oh yeah, he definitely will.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's interesting, Nick. So to answer the first part of the question, I like how you did it with that scale because it makes it quantifiable and easier for me to understand. I think in my mind, we're pretty similar on that, Nick, but I have a little bit of a lower ceiling. My ceiling would be 6'5", I think. I just think there's been enough bad NFL tape with Evan Neal that even if he took a jump, I'm not sure it's to the level I thought he might be.
I said ceiling though, man.
No, I know. And I honestly don't even think the ceiling is 8.5 personally.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I don't. I've soured a bit on Neal. I guess that's where it comes. Like, ceiling for me was, if I was thinking about this right after they drafted Neal, yes, I've just kind of lost that ceiling of Neal in my mind. I still think Neal can get to a floor that's acceptable and that I'm kind of like okay with and good with for what he is. I always kind of viewed him as more of a floor prospect, but I also saw a little ceiling there that I may not see anymore. Same thing goes for JMS, a prospect I wasn't really that thrilled with to begin with, and now he's 25. I think less of a ceiling, more of a floor for both of those two, which kind of leads me more to 6'5". As far as though where the reality is, I'm kind of aligned exactly with you. 4, 5, or 5 for me. I think they can get to league average. And I think not only can they get there, I think they will. And I think Bricillo had a league average unit, if not better, with the Raiders. And I think he had less talent to work with the Raiders. So I think that's really important to note as far as where we think the reality could be. Now, floor, that's a whole nother story because
2.5, baby.
Yeah, I think you're right to say 2. Well, if last year was 2.5, I don't think it can get as bad as last year. I really don't. I don't think. It could if you're as unlucky with the injuries, but it's hard to imagine the injury front can be as unlucky.
But the thing is, we've said that for so many years.
I know,
man.
we have.
It's crazy. We're like, oh man, remember when Wes Martin was starting and all these names that we can just conjure up from the past. And then it happened last year again after investments in the offensive line. We're like, oh, well, we drafted a center. Oh, we got Josh Zudu. He could be the swing this. Oh, maybe all of it was bullshit. So now I'm just hoping with 4 free agents that they added, that won't be the case with free agents who have proven at least to some degree that they're competent enough to step in and play at an NFL level. Whereas the rookies that they tried to plug into those roles, they all sucked. And that was enhanced when the Giants went out and signed Justin Pugh off the freaking couch. And he came in and was their most competent freaking offensive lineman last season, which says something. And I think Joe Shane read that and was like, okay, we're going to invest in veteran free agents who at least have a baseline of understanding of how to play freaking football. Because these rookies, we're not developing them. That's a coaching problem right now that we have. And they suck, to be frank. They're not taking to the coaching. They can't play out here. They're all liabilities. And every rookie, and we can dive into such a huge conversation on this. Maybe it's for another day. Every rookie the Giants have brought in on the offensive line has not developed since Andrew Thomas.
Good point. And that's a great conversation, Nick, because it can lead me to so many directions. Like, one, how much of Andrew Thomas' development is on him alone? Like, I think most of that is him. And I kind of think, like, this goes back to our whole developmental league thing with offensive linemen specifically. I think a lot of this comes down to them personally. Can they develop and that goes to the second part of this listener's question. Thank you so much. I don't know how much faith I want to put in Carmen Bricillo because I almost want to put more weight on the actual players to develop. And in that sense, like, yes, I can look at Carmen Bricillo's track record. He did a good job with these Raiders. He took a lot of like quote unquote no names and got them to play a high level for what the expectation was. But I feel like I can make that same success story for Robert Hunt and all these other, and not Robert Hunt.
You're talking about the guy who's on Florida right now.
Yes. What's his name?
Yes.
Whatever his name is. We forget
Rob
already.
Sale.
It's Rob Sale. This is how many guys we've cycled through. It's unbelievable. Bobby Johnson, all these guys you can say had at some point something good in their track record, just like Bricillo. But in the end, I think a lot of it comes down to the players. And this was told to me off the record, but I spoke with a Giants player, a current player on the roster. I don't want to say how I know him, but Nick knows. And he had a really interesting opinion because I asked him a lot of stuff about the Giants. And what I asked him about was the offensive line specifically. And in his opinion, Bobby Johnson was not to blame for the Giants offensive line. In his opinion, Bobby Johnson was quote unquote a good coach. So I don't know. Like, that's the thing that always interests me when I hear players say that to me. I'm like, we're all blaming it on Bobby Johnson, this and that. The development is not there. I don't know if Bobby Johnson has a magic wand that can like help these guys develop. Sometimes it's on them. So a lot of this comes down to that.
And I don't want to spend too much time here, but I think it's really important. Last year, before the season, we said that the front office derelicted their duty with the offensive line and put way too much chips in the Josh Ezeudu basket, because we all write Josh Ezeudu off as a bust. I think it's somewhat unfair. I understand why we do it, but he was put into almost an impossible situation by the front office. What would we say before the season, especially as the season declined? We were like, there were just so many calculated risks that Joe Schoen took, and they all blew up in his face. They all resulted in a catastrophe. Every calculated risk the New York Giants took, they got the 99th percentile of shit hit them right in the freaking face. Every single one. The tight end situation, the offensive line situation, injuries, and just bad situations, they all manifested themselves, and it made the front office look really bad last season.
You're 100% right. And I think about that, part of the calculated risk, you discussed them specifically on the offensive line. And again, we're taking time on this question, but it's a great question. So I feel like it's worth unpacking. A lot of it was they put a lot of weight on guys who didn't have a lot of NFL reps. Evan Neal, John Michael Schmitz, Josh Ezeudu, even Ben Bredesen to an extent, not a lot of reps. McKethan too, another guy with not a lot of reps. That's why this offseason, people are getting so mad they didn't use this 4th round pick and 5th round pick and an offensive lineman or even a 3rd round pick. Meanwhile, they're looking at it like we put a lot of weight on rookies and guys and second-year guys who didn't have a lot of reps. Now let's put some weight on guys with reps, right? Illuminor, Runyon, Stinney, Schlottman to an extent, like guys who have actually had reps at the NFL level. Let's not put him in there, but guys with reps at the NFL level. And it's different. It's a different approach. And I kind of am more for it just because of what we've seen with the whole, let's develop them. Let's let the young rookies take their lumps, because I've seen too many breakdowns mentally. I've seen too many communication errors with the stunts, just things that just shouldn't be happening at an NFL level.